Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see you all here. I almost didn't make it because I'm a bad vegan. I was sick. But I'm good enough to talk now. All right, so the title of this talk is We Can't Do This Alone. And it will be about asking help and getting help from other parties. So you and I, everybody in this room here, share this wonderful and very ambitious dream to get all these animals out of their cages and to avoid suffering, to avoid injustice. And it's a very big dream. It's a tall order because there's 75 billion of these animals every year being confined and killed. And it's a really difficult situation to solve. It's maybe one of the biggest challenges that humanity ever took upon itself. But fortunately, we have a plan to do that, right? What is that plan? That plan is just to make everybody go vegan, right? And if we make everybody go vegan, we get to this vegan world. And then all the suffering is gone, and all the animals are free, and we're all happy. And so my question is, first of all, how are we doing? How is this goal going for us? How is it working for us? There's different signs. So there's these signs like the unstoppable rise of veganism, how a fringe movement went mainstream. This is an article from The Guardian. And you've seen all these articles, especially the ones we make, our movement makes it itself, like very enthusiastic, like we're increasing our numbers in 600% in the last few years, etc., etc. But then there's also these other signs, like some people saying like, well, we're not growing very fast. You've heard David this morning, maybe some of you, saying, and Nathalie, saying that the number of vegetarians and vegans hasn't risen all that much lately. So which is true? Is the number of vegetarians and vegans on the rise? Who says yes? Who says no? Who didn't say anything at all? The right answer is, we don't know. We don't know as yet. I suspect we'll find out sooner or later, but right now we don't know. And why do we not know? First reason is because many of the research that we're doing is a bit sloppy, and we ask people to self-identify. Like we ask them what they are. Are you vegetarian? Are you a vegan? And then they might say, yes, I'm vegetarian, even though they eat chicken every day or whatever, you know. So that's reason number one. And the second reason is called the error margin. So there's always an error margin in every research, in every poll that you do. An error margin of 2% means that your actual result may be 2% off in either direction. So if you have a result that says we have 2% vegans and the error margin is 2%, it might be 0 or 4%. So certainly those researchers that say that like the number of vegans increased from this year to this year, if the error margin on both of these researches was off, then we don't know anything, right? And well, you could solve this by sampling a huge population, but we normally don't do that because we don't have the money for that. So that's why it is unsure, as of this moment, whether the vegetarians in number are growing. And I would say like, at present, we still have something like this situation, a very small number. Also, if you look at market share of vegan or vegetarian versus meat products, then you see this in red, the meat products or the animal products, in blue, the plant-based products, in US and in Germany. So it doesn't look too good. This vegan world looks a bit far away at the moment, right? So I think it's fair to say that our movement can use some help. Where can we get help from? Who can help us? I would say all kinds of things, you know, media and celebrities and businesses and vegetarians are helpful and all kinds of things. And you may think that's obvious. Well, not everybody agrees. May I present to you this sign here that was at a conference or a festival at somewhere in Canada, I believe. Can you see what the animals need? You could object against lettuce bikinis. Yeah, we don't need that. But celebrities, liberal media, vegetarianism, Lab-grown meat? No. Donations? Can't use them. Bigger cages? Not useful. Reducers? Peter Singer? Oh no. Yoga? And not even compassion and love are welcome, according to these people. And the only thing that will save us is veganism and veganism alone, right? And that's, of course, a big mistake. We are very small, and we are trying to get bigger. And sometimes we talk about enlarging the circle of compassion, widening the circle of compassion. I'm going today to talk about widening the circle of our movement and including more parties in our movement so that we don't remain this small, but we can include everybody and become bigger and create this vegan world. And I'm going to talk about 10 groups of people or concepts that some people think are the enemy, but that actually can be very helpful. The first group is maybe the most controversial one to some people. It is the near vegans, the people who are almost there. Does anybody know this woman? Anybody? Kalel, or Kalel, or whatever you pronounce it. She's an American blogger. She has 2 million followers. And not so long ago, she came out with a video in which she said she wasn't the perfect vegan. And she admitted some things, some crimes. She says that now and then she eats popcorn at the movie theater, which apparently can have butter or not. She has some makeup products that are not vegan. And she does some other things. What does she use? Like one item of makeup and one perfume and some other things. And she said, like, yeah, I admit these things are not vegan, and I'm not the perfect vegan. And the point she wanted to make was a point about perfectionism, like I think Melanie made also before me today. Point about perfectionism. She said, like, we have to get rid of this 100% perfectionist shit. That's what she said, actually. And she was, of course, attacked by many vegans. And they said, like, oh, you call yourself a vegan, but you can't because you're not a vegan. You know? Being 99.9% vegan is not being vegan. You know? She actually, I was in conversation with her privately on, on email, and she told, she said, you can't imagine how many really, she said, like, I'm not really famous. She said, you can't imagine how many really famous friends I have that are as close to me to being vegan, which to me is being vegan, but who don't dare to talk about it because they're afraid to get so much shit as she gets. Isn't that dramatic? I mean, that these people don't dare to talk about being almost vegan because of the fear of the backlash, right? Do you know this? It's from Life of Brian, right? And so what happens here is in this scene, this guy on the left says, are you the Judean People's Front? And John Cleese says, fuck off! And the other guy says, what? Judean People's Front. We're the People's Front of Judea. And the other guy says, can I join you? I hate the Romans as much as anybody. And John Cleese says, the only people we hate more than the Romans are the fucking Judean People's Front. So what's going on here is people who are very similar, who are fighting very intensely. It's a bit what's going on sometimes in our movement. You know, people who are so similar to us. They're almost there. They maybe have different reasons, different motivations, but they're almost there. And certainly when you compare them to the rest of the population, they're so close to us. But we fight. And Sigmund Freud called this the narcissism of small differences. Small differences become enlarged. And why is that? His theory is that our identity, and veganism is to some extent part of our identity, our identity gets threatened the most by the people most similar to us. The ones who are far, far away from us, they don't threaten us. But the people who are like almost us, but not quite, and they have different opinions about some things, they're threatening, and we don't like them, so we're going to fight. So that was the first one, very close to us, right? We're going to go a little bit further and further away every time. The second one is the vegetarians. Have you ever heard vegans say, vegetarians, that's worse than nothing? That really doesn't make sense. Okay? Here's a research that says that the main attitude, the main belief that vegans have, this is a bit older, maybe it changed, hopefully it changed. The main belief that vegans have about vegetarians is that they're hypocrites. Not that they're helpful, that they help saving animals, but that they're hypocrites. Here is some calculations, however, that Nick Cooney did about the impact of vegans versus the impact of vegetarians in terms of helping animals. So if the impact of a vegan is 100%, then we look how much comparatively the impact of the vegetarian is. And we look at it on two dimensions. First of all is the number of lives spared, and you see the vegan saves 100. A lacto-ovo vegetarian, so a vegetarian who still consumes dairy and eggs, saves 94% of that 100%, or 94 lives. And the lacto-vegetarian who uses dairy but avoids eggs actually has 99% of the vegan's impact in terms of lives saved. Another dimension we can look at is the days of suffering spared, which is also a very important parameter or metric. And there you see the same thing, vegan 100, a lacto-ovo 88, and a lacto-vegetarian 99. So it's almost the same. It's not that much different. So to say that it's worse than nothing is bullshit, right? So let's appreciate vegetarians for what they do. Let's not discourage them. And also there's more of us, actually. More of them than us. And if there's vegetarians in the room, please feel welcome, of course, right? Number 3 is reducers. Some of you may be familiar with this argument that I often use in my talks. So reducers, the people who reduce their consumption, are very, very useful as well. And it is, or it can be, useful to talk about reduction to some people who are not ready to go vegan. The reducers may become vegans. They have taken a step and they may take more steps. Altogether, they reduce suffering more than the number of vegans altogether. Why is that? Because there's a lot more of them. So if you count the cows that are spared or the animals that are spared by reducers and the animals that are spared by vegans, the reducers save more. I'm not going to say you have to become a reducer, of course. We need to get our numbers up. And thirdly, many reducers together may tip the system faster than a small number of vegans. And maybe you're familiar with my analogy with the gluten-free thing. Gluten is the new Al-Qaeda. What do we have in the gluten-free field? We have a small number of people who are allergic, but a much higher number of people, 10 times higher, who can appreciate gluten-free products now and then. And it's for them that the gluten-free products are created. They constitute an interesting market. And thanks to them, the really allergic people have a lot better products today. Same thing with us, with the vegan movement. Small number of vegans, much higher number of reducers, right? It's for them, again, at this point in time, it will change, but at this point in time, they form the most interesting market segment, the one that makes it worthy and interesting for producers to cater to. 86% of people buying plant-based products are meat eaters, right? The reducers make it easier for everybody to go vegan. If you have an easy time today to be vegan, and if you have this whole range of, for instance, plant-based milks to choose from, that's not necessarily, and certainly not only, to the work of the vegan movement, but it is thanks to a lot of reducers who are asking for these products. If you look at the market share of non-dairy, it's 13%. 13% of the milk sold in the world right now is plant-based milk. Of course, it's not 1% of vegans that's drinking all that 13% of plant-based milk, right? It's the reducers. And here in this graph, you see that 42% of people who consume dairy alternatives consume both dairy and non-dairy. And it's only here in the bottom, 4% of people who only use non-dairy. So the biggest part of that market and where that demand comes from is from people who use both and who are reducers. And it's also important to realize that these people don't necessarily have the same motivations as us to eat what they eat. They have a range of motivations, belly problems and stomach aches and I don't know what allergies, and the right motivation according to us, their animal rights and cruelty issues, is just a part of it. And we may find it a bit annoying that they don't have the right motivation to do the right thing. But that can come, that can grow. Because as soon as they eat these products and they see that they're tasty, they can drop their defense against these animal rights arguments and they can start listening to you. Because they know they have nothing to lose anymore. Number 4 is meat eaters. It becomes more and more difficult, doesn't it? To widen the circle of our movement. So how can they be helpful? Can they be helpful? Some people think they can't, and they do their very best to alienate meat eaters, like this person here. This is random from Facebook. If you're fully aware of the horrors of the meat and dairy industries but refuse to go vegan, you're not a good person. I don't know how that will arrive with this meat eater. They will say like, oh yeah, that's true, I'm going to make my life better, become a better person. I don't think that happens a lot. So I don't think this is a good message if we want to get meat eaters on board. This is the adoption of innovation curve that is used to explain the adoption of new technology. And we divide people into segments in terms of how fast they are in adopting new technology. So for instance, a smartphone, if there's anybody of you who doesn't have a smartphone yet, they would be considered, you don't have one? Yeah, you are here with the laggards. You may be very fast in other areas, I don't know. And if you already had a smartphone back in the year 2000, then you would have been an innovator. And it's important to realize that in the field of food, if you are a vegan or a vegetarian, you're all innovators. And it's important to realize that the rest of the population is going to take more time. Because these people are different. Because they're less daring, or they have another different upbringing, or different values, or they have health problems, or they can have all kinds of challenges which make that they don't do what we are doing. Right? So rather than saying that meat eaters are bad, what could be an alternative? Meat eaters are slow. Right? Slow is more polite than saying they're bad. So imagine that this represents the difficulty of becoming vegan, this slope. The steeper the slope is, the more difficult it is. So if you have a slope that's as steep as this, then only a small part of the people will be able to go vegan. There's a lot of effort required. But if you can decrease the slope, make it easier to go vegan by providing many more products that are tastier and tastier every day, and they're cheaper, etc., and they're available everywhere, then the slope goes down, gets less steep, and a lot more people can go vegan. Can you imagine, like, what if we can at some point make the slope like not a slope anymore, but just like that? Or maybe even a downward slope, so that people just by default get into that, right? The point here is that everybody of you needed a certain kind of comfort to make the climb. And you wouldn't have done it if it was like this, right? You think you would have done it, but you can't really be sure, right? So for everybody has a different degree to which they're able to willing to walk the slope. So if alternatives are not very available, the effort is very high. If we can make the alternatives more available, better, etc., people need to have lower effort, to make a lower effort. And that's important because not everybody, as you very well know, is prepared to make the effort, right? So let's make it easier. I just put in this slide of the slowest person in the world. I was recently at a vegan festival, and there was a guy eating meat, raw meat right there. He's the slowest one of them all. So next, let's go to farmers and butchers and hunters and people like that. Becomes really difficult now. Now the thing is that you have to remember, and it's a very simple message, that everybody can change. Everybody. Let me give you some examples of people who changed. This is Fraser Bailey, who's a vegan bodybuilder. And you know how popular these are these days. And he used to be a butcher. Right? This is a dairy company that was led by this guy, Henry Schwartz. And you would have said like, horrible person, dairy company, rapes cows, etc. You know. But then what happened was that he turned over his dairy company and it became a plant-based milk company. So, well, I don't think he did it because people were like angry at him all the time. He just realized something at some point. Or this person here. Oh, yeah. Yeah, this is the change that they went to. They were working on cows with these kind of machines, and now they're using these kind of machines to make nut milk. Right? It's beautiful. It's an example of how everybody can make that change. Even this guy, Alvaro Munera, he is a bullfighter, he was a bullfighter, and now he's an animal rights activist. He came to his senses. He said he experienced some stuff in the ring, stuff that he saw with the animals, and he changed his mind. It can happen to all of us. I find it funny how if people go in that direction from being an animal abuser to a vegan hero, or just a vegan or a vegan activist, we consider them like heroes, and they will be filmed, they will be in documentaries, and we will film them, and we will want to interview them, right? But if people make the other direction, if they're vegans and then they go back to eating meat, then we really get irritated, right? And so I think it has something to do with expectations. If you have high expectations and then people disappoint you, but the other way around, if you don't have any expectations and then they surprise you. So people can change. Some people won't. Some people will continue to do cruel things for some time. I think one remedy or one thing that makes it maybe a little bit easier to tolerate is, I think, a very nice saying, and you can leave out the God. It's not meant as a religious saying, but it says, "There but for the grace of God go I." Do you understand what it means? It's a bit difficult grammar, but it means like, but for the grace of God. If things had turned out differently for me, I could have done that. It could have been me. This person who does these horrible things, if I had been in his situation, if I had been his or her upbringing, his or her genetics, whatever, I might have done the same thing. Who am I to judge? I think that can help in being less judgmental sometimes. Number 6 is big meat and dairy. Companies that are really involved in killing and selling animal parts. What if they change and jump on the wagon, on the vegan wagon? What do we think of that? We don't always like it. This is when KFC introduced vegan nuggets. I think that's good news. Who thinks that's good news? Okay, a couple of people. But here there's like a lot of comments, just as an example, like people saying like, I will never go in there, and they're torture animals, and torture is like an intentional thing. I don't think many people torture animals in these industries. Okay, that's not a fair thing to say, I think. So they blame them for still continuing to be bad, still continuing to have a stake in killing animals, and of course we don't like that. But this step that they're taking is of course wonderful, and I'm very hopeful that many companies can take that step. Because if you look at it, if you look at the different segments in the animal production economy, you have the primary production, the people who are producing the animals, raising the animals. For them, change is not so easy. They don't have equipment, etc., that they all of a sudden can use for plant-based products. Sometimes there have been stories about that, but it's very rare. So it's hard for them to transfer. We have to start thinking about that, for them to make the transition, how they can do that. But if you look at these other layers, secondary production, these are the people who make sausages from meat and meat products. These people don't care, right, what their resource is that they put in the sausages, if it's plant-based or animal-based. They don't care. As long as people buy it, that's great. Same for the distribution, which is supermarkets, retail, and restaurants. They won't care either. Whatever they're selling, if it sells, it's okay. So these people are technically very open to change. They're not really married or wed to the idea of using animals. They're agnostic as to what resource they use. And we are seeing this. This is the CEO of Tyson. Tyson is one of the biggest meat companies in the world. And this guy says the future of meat might be meatless. If we can make meat without animals, why shouldn't we, or why couldn't we? Why wouldn't we? This is actually on the Tyson website. Who would have thought 5 years ago that on the website of one of the biggest meat companies in the world there would be a message about growing meat, making meat without animals? How fantastic, right? And of course, I understand the frustration as well. Like, we've seen that these people have been profiting from killing and selling animals for many years. They made a lot of money from it. And then now they're going to profit as well from the alternative, now that it's finally here and profitable. Isn't that very unfair? Yeah, in a way it is unfair, but that's the way it has to go. That's the way it will go. We've seen that these companies like Tyson are buying into vegan companies. For instance, Beyond Meat has been bought for 5% by Tyson, right? Or Daiya cheese has been bought by a Japanese pharmaceutical company. Pharmaceutical companies have to test on animals. Or Alpro, a Belgian brand originally, was bought by Danone, French company, French dairy company, right? Are these good or bad things? Well, first of all, I don't know if it's relevant, if you think it's good or bad. They're happening, and probably they're necessary. I think actually that we can't do without this. And these are some slides that I'm borrowing from Matthew Glover from Veganuary. If this is all the meat, egg, and dairy industries, this whole black box here, this black square or rectangle, then the plant-based food industry is just a small part of that, this white square. And actually most of that is owned by animal companies. Most of that white. So if you would look only at the companies that are entirely ethical, that are not the property of animal companies, you would have something like this. Very small. Not strong enough to change the world. Right? Even if we would have like 1,000% growth in the next 10 years, and these companies would go tenfold, become 10 times as big, it would still be a drop in a bucket. So we need these big companies, and they have several advantages. They have big marketing budgets. This is from my town. This is the first time that I'm seeing actually a vegetarian advertising campaign in the street. It's because a big brand is behind it. It's a hamburger chain, something like McDonald's, but in Belgium, quick. Right? Other smaller vegan companies don't have the money to do that. So what they are helping to do is mainstreaming this idea of vegetarian and vegan products. They're putting them out there, showing them to the public, also showing, look, we have this. You can come in here and eat them. And when you're like with a party of 4 and there's one vegan among you, you can still come in. And that one vegan doesn't feel all alone anymore. And there's other advantages. This is the CEO of Rügenwalder Mühle, which is a German meat company. He says, sausage is the cigarette of the future. So I think that one of the good sides of them investing, or animal companies investing in plant-based products, is that as soon as they're betting on two horses, to say it with a non-vegan saying here, but if they can profit from both the plant-based and the animal segment, then they will not be so defended against plant-based anymore. They will not try to sabotage it anymore because they're profiting from the growth. And we see this in their case. As you may know, in Europe, as in other places, there's lobbying going on by the animal industry to make sure that sausages cannot be called sausage. Have you heard that? Like, for instance, which is already the case, soy milk can no longer be called milk in Europe, right? It has to be called drink. So they're trying to do that with meat too. And this company is actually one of the companies who resisted. It's a meat company. They put in the most money of them all, right? What they also have, companies like these, is a lot of money for R&D, for improving the products. One guy from Alpro, from the soy milk company, said, one of the advantages that we have now that we are part of the known, is that these known people are experts in fermentation. And they will help us make our yogurt even better, our plant-based yogurt even better. So all this expertise, it's valuable. They have contracts with supermarkets and with all kind of retail industries, which is very valuable also, right? And lastly, there's their brand recognition. These brands are very big and therefore very famous. They did a research in Germany about the market penetration, which means how many people have already tasted your product, bought and tasted your product. And the market penetration of the average vegan company, you know how high it is? How many people have already bought and tasted the products of a certain vegan company? It's about 2%. This company also put vegetarian products in the market with the exactly same brand image. People recognize that. They say oh, this is a variation of this product. Their market penetration for their vegetarian products is 40%. It's 20 times as high. People are willing to try that because they recognize the brand, right? So, one way to look at it is also like this. Sometimes I ask people, people who are against McDonald's, and we're all against McDonald's, right? I ask them, what does McDonald's have to do for you and able to, be a little bit happy about them? And they say, it has to disappear. Yeah, well, okay. It's not going to go bankrupt overnight, right? It's also not going to become a vegan company overnight. So the only thing that can happen is that gradually, incrementally, it's going to introduce vegan products and get more and more vegan friendly and attract more and more customers who use these products or who buy these products. Just like these guys, Haagen-Dazs and Ben & Jerry, they're not becoming a vegan company overnight, but who knows? In a couple of years, Ben & Jerry's might say, well, our products are just as good, selling just as well, they're better for the environment, maybe our profit margins are bigger, let's just get rid of dairy milk. That's very possible. Look at the slogan there. It's like a landline, you don't need it. Number 7 is, and David already talked about this morning, capitalism. We can work with that as well, and we have to. And capitalism has a lot of problems. Right? It's not an ideal system, not by far. We have to work on it, or we have to maybe replace it at some point, but we can't wait for the fall of capitalism to start helping animals. And capitalist industries or businesses can help us very much, like I already showed. If this is the consumer, then we have our movement throwing all kinds of moral messages at them and health messages. We're trying to change their attitudes. We're trying to make them care But this person has to have something to eat, right? And that's where the companies come in, the industry, the economy, and they make for them their products. Bertolt Brecht, German playwright, said, food comes first, then morality. He meant that if people go hungry, they can't really care about ethics. If people don't have enough to eat, this was 19th century or something, right? They just can't care. And it's pretty similar in our movement. If people don't know that there's good food, great vegan food, they won't care. They will be afraid to care because they will be afraid that they have to give up something that they like very much. So let's show them that there's nothing to give up, that there's really good products out there. And that's what we need the help of these businesses for. And capitalism can help create these products. This is the amount of money that's been invested by raising capital, venture capital, in the last 5 years or something, or 8 years. It's more than $1 billion right now. Can you see do you remember Nathalie this morning gave a number of the combined budget of the whole animal rights movement together? Does anybody remember it? Yeah, $170 million, right? Worldwide. And this is just a couple of years for a couple of companies. You see? If you compare, the amount of money that goes in there is very important. So these are some of the investors in all these businesses. And that's actually beautiful. I mean, the fact that they can see not just that this is an environmentally sound thing to do, a sustainable thing to do, investing in these companies, but it's also something profitable. For the first time, money, profit, has become a driver. We like our own drivers, our ethical drivers, caring for animals, empathy, compassion, sustainability, health, maybe. But profit is also a driver. Let's just allow these people to do the right thing for maybe what we think are the wrong reasons. And maybe their reasons change afterwards. So these investors make possible all these wonderful companies. Impossible Burger has raised $400 million. Has anybody heard of Ripple? Ripple is a pea protein milk based on pea protein. They have acquired, I think, $100 million to start their business and to develop it. It could be a game changer because, as you see, it has a lot of assets here. Let me go back. It's going to be better than milk. So you need some money to develop that and to market that, right? These guys, David also already mentioned it, just mayo. This mayo is the only mayo now used by Compass Group, the biggest caterer in the US, and by 7-Eleven. So they're only using this mayo in their sandwiches and their salads. This has nothing to do with these people in these companies in Compass Group caring about chickens. But it does mean a huge amount of chicken saved. Again, maybe the wrong reasons, but with the right impact, the right result, right? And the other way around, if it's clear that at some point the money is in danger, then we'll see people warning against that. Here's a warning from somebody at NASDAQ, the stock exchange. They're saying, like, think twice about investing in things that are heavily dependent on meat. It's getting dangerous. And this initiative, the FAIR initiative, is trying to convince big companies, Tesco and Unilever and all kind of big companies, to diversify, to make sure that they're not betting too much on animal products because animal products are problematic. And in the future, they're going to be threatened, or the profitability of animal products is going to be threatened. Number 8 is money. And I find it interesting how several of these talks in this this weekend are about money. And to me it means that it's an important message, first of all, and apparently some of us need to hear it. Because we have this idea of money as something, we're all very good people, right? Very moral people. And many of us, I think, have learned that money is something a bit dirty, right? Not so ethical. You don't want to touch it. You don't want to get too close to it. I think if you throw a lot of money in this group of vegans, many people would like, how many vegans does it take to accept a donation, you know? But of course, money is so important to get things done. This is the growth of a number of organizations in the last couple of years in terms of their revenue. You see it's going up. And that's a wonderful thing. I mean, the movement is so much more funded today than it was 10 years ago. And we have some rich people who are putting their money where their mouth is, who are putting their money into good things. And that's a wonderful thing. I would also suggest you to maybe care a little bit about money for yourselves. That's a dangerous message. And I would say, like, don't be afraid of becoming impure or a bad person for caring a little bit about money. I've learned, I've never cared about money. I'm 45 years old. And most of my career in animal rights has been unpaid, has been volunteer. Because I have a girlfriend who has a house and we don't have to, like, we don't have to have a lot of money because we don't have to pay rent, etc. If I lose my girlfriend, I'm in trouble. But I've never cared about it. And then recently I discovered, like, actually that by not caring, by not investing money, I've lost a lot of money. And the thing is that all these people that we consider like, well, they don't care much about the world, but they all know about money. We don't. We're like very poor, good people. Right? And we can't leave the making of money to the other people who are not going to use it for good things. So it is, I think, smart and useful to get interested a little bit in money and maybe to start being interested in investing and things like that. Just a small example. You see, like, this is if you invest 1,000 euros, and this is the difference if you get a 2% return or a 7% return in interest. You see, you've all learned this at school, but all of you have forgotten it, I think. The magic of compound interest. Einstein called this the eighth wonder of the world. And you see that the longer you do it, the more the difference gets enlarged. So it means, like, start early in life, so you're all young. It's time for you to start being interested. And why do I say that? Not just because you can be more comfortable, but also because if you have money, of course, you can donate it. If you don't want it, if you think it's dirty, don't keep it, give it away, you know. Start a vegan business with it, or you have maybe some buffer to, like, do 2 years of volunteer work for another organization because you have some backup, right? It's not dirty. You can do good things with it. Number 9, science and technology. Many people will say, like, yeah, of course, they can help us. But there is still a lot going on of, like, this attitude of, like, nature is who, and nature takes care of everything. What nature produces is the best of all, and whatever we touch with our dirty hands, that's going to go wrong. That's a bit of a naive idea of nature, a naive view of nature. There's a lot of suffering in nature. There's a lot of really toxic products produced by nature. Nature never cared about our well-being. I mean, unless you are spiritual and you believe that there is some kind of plan behind it, which is definitely possible. I'm not sure. But if you don't believe that, then nature is just a force that is blind, basically, that never optimized for our happiness. And there's no reason to think that in some fields we cannot do better than nature. There's good reason to think that we can improve upon nature. And yeah, we can make mistakes. We're going to make a lot of mistakes, but eventually I think we'll get it right. And we can make really good things for the planet. through science. Ooh, look at that, you know. Technology and science and like all these nasty things. So this is the most controversial one here. GMOs, genetically modified organisms. Many people are thinking they're like really bad. I don't want to propagate them or whatever, but I just want to invite you to think about them again and to consider that maybe it's not black and white. Maybe some GMOs, some technologies can be really good. If you want to be more informed about that, go to vegangmo.com and you'll find a page made by vegans about how GMOs can be beneficial for reducing animal suffering. Maybe you hate me right now. I don't know. And from GMOs to NGOs, yeah, this is here too. Big NGOs. Of course they can help us, but as you may know, not everybody believes that. And maybe some of you are involved in organizations and you see that the bigger you get, the more successful you get, the more effective you get, the more some of our own people are going to be against you and going to second guess you, your motives and how you're doing, etc. That's of course deplorable. I mean, we need big organizations. We need them because in a big organization it's easier to build skills. It's easier to be representative of a big segment of the population, so you can represent them to politicians, etc. So there's many different reasons why we need them. And I see so many people talking about like, oh, these big organizations, they only care about fundraising and keeping themselves alive, etc., etc. And yeah, it can happen. Bigger organizations can go astray, and we have to make them accountable, hold them accountable for how good they're doing, because in part they're using public money, sometimes subsidies, donor money. So let's make sure that they're doing a good job, but let's not second guess everything that they do, because there are people there who've really thought about strategies, who sometimes maybe not even be able to communicate their strategy because the farmers, etc., are also reading it. So maybe they cannot make it clear to you what they want to do really, but maybe some faith and some trust in what they want to do is in order. Right. So we've had 10. My question now is, who is the enemy? Right? It's not all of these. All of these, well, of course, yes, some of these are problematic, yes, certainly, but all of these can be very helpful and are actually probably necessary if we want to make progress for the animals. So is there no enemy? Can we be just like peaceful and say like no enemies? Well, some of you may get very restless if there's no enemy. You go like, who do we have to fight? I need to fight somebody. So let me explain that there are some enemies, yes. For instance, there are still parts of the industry that want to sabotage the vegan movement, like in this example of people trying to make sure that we cannot call soy milk milk. They're afraid of their profits, and so they're going to make it less interesting for people to buy vegan products. There are also people in the world who are not very nice, right? They don't have the best intentions, I assume. I don't know them personally, but probably it's safe to say that their values are not our values. So sometimes, yes, we have to fight, we have to resist, because not everything is going to be okay if we don't. But let's look mainly, if we want to identify an enemy, let's look at ourselves. We want to extend this movement beyond ourselves. We want to have a lot of people joining us so that we can make the biggest change, the biggest impact for animals. And that's not going to happen if we look at things in an us versus them frame, a black and white frame. We are the vegans and the other people are problematic for some reason. They are not part of the solution, they are part of the problem. I think it's wiser to see things like gradually, like on a spectrum from non-vegan to vegan, and all the people in between, people who make a serious effort, who change their behavior, let's consider them part of the solution instead of part of the problem. This is the Ngorongoro crater in Tanzania. For the Americans in the room, that's in Africa. So this is a crater that is 600 meters deep and 260 kilometers wide. And it forms actually a natural enclosure. So the lions, it's home to a big population of Maasai lions. And these lions who are in this crater, they can't really escape. Only very rarely a lion gets out or gets in. And what's the result of that? The result is that there's very few new bloodlines coming in, and that the gene pool is deteriorating, and that these animals are not the healthiest. Right? They cannot get out. They're interbreeding, they're inbreeding. And I think sometimes we're in danger of doing this in the vegan movement. Inbreeding among vegans, not literally. But our ideas are not meeting ideas from the outside enough. And they could get better. They could get more effective. They could get more up to date if we confront our ideas with ideas of the people outside, right? So we should not look at ourselves as like this little small movement of or group of pure people, good people, against all these different sectors, the economy and the big pharma and all kinds of things, you know. And we are the good ones and the other ones are the bad ones. We should not look at things like black and white or right and wrong or good and evil. I think we are also a little bit red, and the other ones, all these other segments, are also mixed. You know, there's good and bad in everybody. And we have, to some extent, we have very pure motivations. We want to help the animals. But there is also impure motivations in us. There's some ego and there's all kinds of things, you know. So I think realizing that and being aware that we're not perfect and that the other people are not evil is something that will help us tremendously and will help the animals tremendously. And we have to accept differences, accept that people are different, will be slower, will have different opinions, also within our movement. You know, Melanie talked about infighting. Why do we infight? One of the reasons is probably that we don't trust each other. We don't trust each other when we see that other people have different strategies. We think that like they're doing it for different reasons than us. But if we are charitable and if we believe that the other people are doing it for the same reasons, to help animals, even while they have different tactics, then we could get along much better. So it's not because others have different ideas and beliefs and strategies that they have different intentions. Let's believe in each other's intentions. I'll finish with this. There is one huge evil that we have to take very seriously. I think one of the things that can most help us is good vegan taste experiences. People tasting really good food, because if they experience like, oh my God, this is good food, their mind and their heart opens up for arguments. So if really good food is really helpful, the real enemy is really bad vegan food. And I wrote it in the Comic Sans font to make it even more terrible, you see. So I think this is really problematic, bad vegan food. People better eat meat than bad vegan food, I think. All the rest we can work with. I think we can expand our movement, include everybody, so that we become a huge group, that we accept people with different attitudes, different beliefs, different strategies, so that we can make a lot more impact for animals. Thank you very much.